My name is Sam Sackeroff, and I am the gallery director and curator here at the Art Students League of New York. And I feel that you could join us for tonight's talk, Curating Dia Art Foundation, with our guest, Matilde Guidelli-Guidi, curator at Dia and co-head of the curatorial department. Matilde has been instrumental in Dia's, please. A warm league welcome. Matilde has been instrumental in Dia's projects and programming for almost a decade, in addition to serving as curatorial liaison for Dia Bridgehampton and Walter Di Maria's Lightning Field in New Mexico, as well as for all of Dia's sites here in New York. Matilde plays a crucial role in developing Dia's exhibitions and live programs. She relaunched Dia's Influential Artists on Artists series, which offers contemporary artists a chance to reflect on the work of artists in Dia's remarkable history, and has curated or co-curated many important exhibitions, including most recently Jack Whitten, the Greek Alphabet series, which was on view at Dia Beacon from November 22 through July 23, the long-term installation Senga Nagudi, which opened at Dia Beacon in February 2023 and will be on view through March 2026, and Dwayne Linkletter, 12+2, which opened at Dia Chelsea in September 25 and closes on January 24th. So if you haven't seen it, you have time, not much time, some time. Before joining Dia, fantastic. Matilde held positions at the International Center for Photography, the Wayne Museum of American Art, Paula Kupla Gallery, and the Musée du Louvre. Hello, welcome. Now, I've been looking forward to tonight's talk for a number of reasons, in addition to giving me a chance to speak to Matilde, who I'm thrilled to say is both a colleague and a friend. The talk tonight also is an opportunity to speak both about Dia's distinct place in the landscape of contemporary art and to put Dia and the Art Students League in a bit of a dialogue. As you will hear tonight, Dia is completely unique. Its approach to artist commissions, site-specific work, and its commitment to cultural discourse more broadly gives it a profile that is unlike that of any other institution. Any of you who are familiar with Dia know that. But that said, Dia and the Art Students League do overlap in a few different ways. For one, like the League, Dia is artist-centered. It was established because of and has developed in response to the needs of artists, and like the League, it continues to exist for artists first and foremost. Also, like the Art Students League, which as many of you will know, it celebrated our 150th anniversary last year, Dia also is in a celebratory mood still, I hope, having celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2024. And then lastly, many of the artists who Dia has collaborated with over its history are distinguished Art Students League alumni, including Louise Bourgeois, who studied here in 1938, Donald Judd, who studied here in 1948 to 1953, Barnett Newman, 1922-1930, Robert Smithson, 55-56, and Cy Twombly, 50 to 52. I was actually telling Matilde earlier that Cy Twombly and Robert Rauschenberg met each other downstairs in studios 15 and 16, not at Black Mountain College, right here on 57th Street. So tonight's talk will have two threads. It will be a chronology of some of the key moments in Dia's history, and it'll also be a discussion of some of the unique considerations that curating at Dia involves. Those threads, I hope, will interweave, and over the course of the talk, we will touch on some of the remarkable works that Dia has commissioned, unpack terms like site and stewardship that are key to Dia's mission, and also discuss, most importantly, how Matilde's recent projects have built on Dia's remarkable history and in some cases put pressure on that history in interesting ways. We'll cover lots of ground, but I hope we'll also leave time at the end for your questions, which I think Matilde will kindly and generously answer. So with that preamble out of the way, please join me again in welcoming Matilde Guidelli-Guidi.
Thank you, Sam.
Great, so let's start with the basics and at the beginning. On screen we have Dia's 3 current locations. Do you want to tell us a little bit about each one?
Yeah, certainly. So I think compared to other institutions, the first thing to note is that Dia is multi-sited, and that goes back to 1974 when the institution was established, thinking very much about not so much a single building as a museum, be it a museum as a repository for the collection or a single building where to program rotating exhibitions, but rather to partner with artists, realize their project that would be unrealizable otherwise because of scope or scale. The legacy of that 50 years later is that, and many events in the history of the institution, is that we currently program across 3 sites. Dia Bridgehampton, that you see on the left, is formerly known as the Dan Flavin Art Institute, was actually purchased for Flavin, who realized a permanent installation of his work on the top, and Flavin himself, following the opening of the building in '83, was the curator there for about a decade, and until, actually less than a decade, for 4 or 5 years, until Dia took on the programming of the lower level. And we continue to do monographic shows on a yearly basis there of artists who reside or work on Long Island. And then Dia Beacon is probably the most well-known of Dia's sites today. It's actually 20 years old, basically, and that was a moment in the institution when a larger building was purchased to present the collection that was formed over the previous 30 years, and that is upstate New York in Beacon along the Hudson, and connected by the river quite intentionally is Dia Chelsea, which was really Dia's outpost since the late 80s. And that following certain, this is on 22nd Street, for those who don't know, 22nd Street between 10th and 11th. Over the years, Dia owned several buildings, and right now it was re-established as a rotating exhibition site and public programming and bookstore, opening just after the pandemic, after a renovation in 2021.
I was just at the bookstore recently again. It's incredible. Everything's worth a visit. But the bookstore is really one of many, many victories for Dia, that space. You mentioned that Dia sort of has these, it's decentered, it has multiple locations, and it can't really be reduced to any one building or space. And that's in response to the vision that the co-founders had when they established it in '74. Can you tell us who we're looking at and some of the thinking, or maybe actually the best way to phrase this is what they were responding to in the art world at that time that felt that they needed something like Dia that hadn't existed before?
Yeah, I think responding to it is a great point. So the 3 co-founders that we see here are, I would say, a philanthropist, an art historian, and an art dealer. Philippa de Menil of the Menil family of Houston, and Ellen Forsyth, who was an art historian who was working at the time for Philippa's parents, who were establishing the Menil collection in Houston, and predominantly working actually on European surrealism and the collection that the Menil was establishing. And then Heiner Friedrich, who opened his gallery in Munich, Germany in 1966, and started to work following very much what was the mode of making art at the time, which is perhaps outside of the studio, very much process-based and site-specific, using non-art materials, and interesting enough, also from an economic standpoint, the business was very much dependent on artists traveling to his gallery and doing site-specific projects, rather than work being imported and exported between Germany and the United States. So Heiner Friedrich had this kind of specific way of working with artists to realize site-specific projects in the gallery, and the roster of Heiner Friedrich and the visionary collecting of the Menil family and the contribution of Ellen as an art historian who was really instrumental in bringing a different lens to the program and the idea, was instrumental in building this almost like almost like utopian idea of collaborating with artists to realize permanent projects. So that was kind of the key idea. And again, as I was saying earlier, as a counter institution without a site, and to be based instead, rather to kind of follow what was in the 70s, a kind of a zeitgeist of rethinking the relationship between the artist studio, the gallery, and the museum. And therefore, DIA was established with this kind of very open-ended mission to support artists realize their vision without a site.
And the thing that I always am struck by is, even from that earliest moment, DIA is being led by the artists.
Very much responding to and catering to the needs of the artists. And I want to say this is specifically true for the first decade, and I consider that first decade basically patronage in terms of really focusing on, but let's say the identity of DIA was established then in the sense of collaborating with a small number of artists, but being extremely generous with them at the level of resources, time, and subsequent engagement. So it's not kind of like you do one show and go. So that is definitely something that still remains in the ethos of the institution, and the curatorial methodology is very much to kind of cast a wide net, find key figures, and then commit to
support
a smaller number of artists, which is, of course, it has its pros and cons today, but
you mentioned also that DIA, one of the things that made works candidates for DIA support was that they were, because of their nature or scale, sort of unrealizable without DIA's specific help. And the two sort of like earliest works that DIA gets behind illustrate that, or certainly the Turrell.
Yeah.
I think, was DIA the first sponsor?
Yes.
If anyone doesn't know, this is still unfinished, but I think DIA was on the ground, the very ground floor.
This actually even predates the formal establishment of DIA, but as Heiner Friedrich starts to travel, so the real story is that Heiner was selling Flavin, was really trying desperately to sell Dan Flavin's work to the Menil seniors. And so he started to travel there, and then he had already a relationship with Walter de Maria, who was doing work in the West, and so he started to travel more frequently. And then he had this kind of vision of the United States as kind of like a place where Heiner Friedrich, where things would be possible in terms of realizing these ambitious projects. So so he started to travel to the US in 1970, 71. He visited the famous stories that he visits the Rothko Chapel in Houston, and he is blown away and says all artists should have something like this. And the artists he was very much interested in, including Walter de Maria and Michael Heiser, and James Turrell, were developing projects that now we recognize as kind of land art. And so before even DIA was formally established, Flavin and Turrell received support for early stages or permanent installations of their work, either in the landscape, as is the case of Turrell, or in the urban fabric, as is the case for Flavin. And that, again, is very much part of what DIA continues to do today. So thinking about stewardship or support and commission of works in the landscape, and stewardship or support of works in the urban fabric.
Right. This next, you mentioned Flavin and the urban fabric. I actually I'm ashamed to say I was not as aware of this work as I should have been. It's so staggering and incredible.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've already kind of established, and will come up again, is that DIA is working outside of the sort of conventional museum structure. The backstory of this piece is that it was, I think, initially intended to be included in the Whitney 200 Years of Sculpture exhibition, but Flavin ended up needing more time and money.
Yeah.
So he literally kind of like breaks the bonds of that traditional exhibition context, and that's where DIA steps in.
Yeah. And again, because DIA did not have a sort of like headquarter. I mean, it did have a headquarter by 76, 77, but
It was an exhibition space.
It wasn't necessarily an exhibition space. It was the idea was still to kind of go around and purchase buildings. That was a big thing that Dia was doing at the time. Purchase a lot of real estate in Soho, which of course was a moment in which real estate was very cheap. At the request of her artist, in order for the artist to be. This was Philippa predominantly purchasing the building, and where the artists, both to support their work as well as to support their practice and daily living. So the first decade is really, that's why I was saying is really patronage, because an example of artists, literally is 11 artists in the old decade, and the first that received support are Lamont Young and Marian Zazila, so a musician and a light artist. And the support manifested in a full building in Tribeca being purchased for them so that they could live there, rehearse.
This is the dream house?
This is today is kind of like what remains of that is the dream house.
Right.
But that was cast iron building in Tribeca, the full building where they had no mandate to present a show or to present a concert. So that was very much in line with that. And so similarly with Flavin, the idea was, where would you like to see your work? And Flavin was very much thinking infrastructurally in a way that perhaps is not thought about today that much, because we consider his work very much as a gallery object. But yeah, he had these real infrastructural projects. One in parallel to this one that was in study for a decade was actually to have a full line going up the World Trade Center. And so the feasibility in the minutes of the institution, you can read meeting after meeting to try and make it happen. And this was at Grand Central Terminal, ironically on the platform where the train to Poughkeepsie leaves. Yes, which is where the train to Beacon goes. But that was...
Oh, I had no, that's incredible.
It's total coincidence, yeah.
The other thing is, this is a great example for lots of reasons. One is it also drives home the point that I think a lot of people, when they think of Dia, do think of land art in these remote locations for good reason. But the engagement with the urban fabric is there from the beginning. The other thing that is incredible here is that, as you see, this is installed for 10 years, until 86. So this investment in long-term exhibitions, long-term installations.
Yeah, and the hope, of course, would be that this project would be permanent and that Dia could ensure that. The dates, you will see a lot of dates, a lot of projects end around 1986. This is when the institution goes bankrupt. After this decade of... yes. But
extremely generous patronage.
Yes.
Moving along here. So here we get to the first of Dia's sites, the New York Earth Room, which you are the principal curatorial liaison for, as well as all of the sites in New York.
The Maria sites,
Can you tell us both about this work and what permanent site means for Dia? Because it's a term that's institutionally specific for you.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we keep on calling sites, as if. But essentially, Dia today, including the 3 locations that we saw at the beginning, stewards a total of 12 sites. So 9 site-specific works that some of them have been there and open to the public. This was installed in 1977, open to the public in 1980. And it says here, the poster is kind of opening January 1st, 1980. There's no closing date because it's still open. And it was installed in 1977, de-installed briefly. I still don't know why and how they decided to take the earth out, but then installed permanently and open to the public since 1980. But the idea of the site comes exactly from this first decade, in which there was no gallery per se, or again, museum as a repository for the collection, but rather asking artists which project they would see realized. And the artist that Dia was working with at the time, beside De Maria, Lamont Young, and Flavin that we already mentioned, are Andy Warhol, Joseph Beuys, and 2 of his students, Blinky Palermo and Imi Knöbel. John Chamberlain, who also had a number of sites that then closed in the 80s. Fred Sandbach, who also had a dedicated museum, who then in actually Massachusetts, because that's where he was living at the time, and he wanted Dia to purchase a bank for him, a former bank for him, and he thought that the variation of heights in the ceiling was really appropriate for his acrylic yarn pieces. And then, who else? De Maria and Donald Judd, of course. So these artists were the ones who, for the first decade, could really build upon this idea of choosing a room, in the case of De Maria, or a field, or a full town, such as Marfa for Judd, where they could install their work in a way that seemed optimal. So the start of the New York Earth Room, De Maria was really a key thinker and thinking partner for the early Dia team, let's say. So, and Heiner in particular, and he had presented his first Earth Room in Munich in 1968 at the Heiner Friedrichs Gallery. Then there was a temporary one in Darmstadt that lasted just the length of an exhibition, and eventually that is the first project that Heiner thought this should be there permanently.
Yeah, and De Maria is really like it does feel like the key early sort of artistic partner, because I think the first several sites, 3 or 4 sites are his.
All Walter's work.
Yeah.
And similarly, the lightning field, there's incredible stories of the test site for the lightning field dates back to 1974. And actually, the other early supporter, and kind of, Dia was not totally unique at the time, and I'm totally blanking on her name. Green Gallery, 3M, Virginia Dwan.
Dwan.
Virginia Dwan was the other big supporter of land art at the time.
And remains a kind of associate of Dia.
Remains associate of Dia, but by the mid-70s she kind of checks out in terms of, and then Dia picks up with De Maria in terms of finding an appropriate site for this idea of the lightning field, which is a bit of a misnomer because it should be called the durational field. There's very rarely lightning at the field.
So speak to that, because that was something I was hoping to bring up. Again, this, Dia has a deep sort of conceptual investment in space, but also in time. You say the durational field.
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
So I don't know if any of you are familiar at all with this artwork, but it's essentially in a very remote area on the high desert in New Mexico, in western New Mexico. It's like about 2.5 hour drive from Albuquerque, and kind of an hour north of this small town called Quemado. And the idea of the work is 400 poles, stainless steel poles that are slightly pointed, and they are aligned at the top, even if, of course, there's asperities in the ground. So De Maria would say if there's a plane of glass, it should sit perfectly and on the poles. So it's a incredible feat of engineering. It's still mesmerizing to figure out how they did it. The poles have all the same height. They're totally aligned at the top. And the idea is that the field, because it's stainless steel, appears and disappears according to light conditions. So something else which is, again, quite unthinkable for other institutions is that Dia committed so deeply to this that Dia owns or has conservation easements for an amount of land which is about twice the size of Manhattan around the lightning field. Incredible. So that there is nothing in the view shed. And you visit the lightning field in the same way that De Maria kind of suggested. He built or reinstalled a homestead cabin next to the field. That is where you are, as you arrive in Quemado, you leave your car and you are driven by somebody, a Dia colleague, to the field. You spend the night there so that you can have almost 24 hours there. And there's 6 people, the cabin sleeps 6 people. The season runs from May 1st through October 31st to allow for winter weather, which is quite harsh there. And nobody being out there, it would be dangerous. And Helen, the third co-founder, along with Heiner and Philippa de Menil, was in charge of actually driving through New Mexico without, of course, Google Map and find the perfect site.
And took years.
Took years, and when she thought she found it, and then when she tells the story, it's quite beautiful. When she thought she found it, she called New York, she calls Walter, I found it. Walter comes to New Mexico, and he's like, there's too much lightning. Yeah. And so it's like, the piece is going to be ruined in a week. So the site now is actually perfect because there's a lot of lightning activity around, but less on the field itself. So it was really specific to the meteorology of the desert. And I must say, it has not changed much. In climate change has affected the site in terms of there's years, almost now we are alternate years of like 0 rain for a full season, and instead a lot of rain the following one. So it creates difficulty to reach the site, but otherwise,
I'm just struck by the fact that we can sort of take it for granted now because it's such a canonical work, but the amount of, commitment, investment on the part of Dia's is inspiring.
And it's always been a small staff. The institution has always had a very small staff, and the people who built the field with Walter and the Dia staff are locals. Yeah. So there's a big generational change happening now, which is quite interesting because the people who built the field were children teenagers in the 70s, are now retiring, and that is the case of the cowboy who Dia partnered with to drive people and who could run cattle. The agreement is that he could run cattle on Dia's land and at the same time oversee the field. And I had the pleasure to interview him when he retired 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it was quite incredible in terms of
I'm sure.
50 years of living with this artwork,
We'll come back to some of those themes when we get to Dwayne's show later, but I'll zip ahead just so we can cover everything.
Another De Maria site in Kassel, Germany. This is called the Vertical Earth Kilometer. And if you believe it, there's a rod.
There's skepticism.
No, it's true. Okay. It's true. There's a rod that goes down a kilometer. And I should say, all this is, again, thanks to the Menil family's money comes from oil, and there's the Lumberger family. So this is an oil drill, essentially. So they could drill 1 kilometer down, and there's a brass rod that goes down 1 kilometer. And what you see, the image on the left shows
the diameter. What
you encounter as you walk through the park in Kassel, and on the right is kind of a detail of the diameter of the piece. So that kind of square plate at the intersection of the park, at the center of that square, there's the diameter of the section of the rod that goes down 1 kilometer.
And the only Dia site that's
in Germany at the moment,
this is a great example also. I think my understanding is that this Andy Warhol Shadows is Dia's first commission, the first instance where they actively commission an artist. Is that true? It's certainly one of the first.
I mean, you can say all the ones we looked at are commissions, but certainly this was a particular occasion in which Warhol was asked to do a show at this space, which was partially the Heiner Friedrich Gallery. So Heiner Friedrich was wearing a double hat, still operating a gallery in New York, and then using the space for temporary exhibitions under the aegis of Dia. So this was one of these cases, and it's interesting, it's 78, 79, the conversation started, and Warhol approached Heiner saying, I want to do a painting show, nobody thinks of me as a painter anymore. Nobody will come for the paintings. Everybody will come for the party. And so, you know, and that is very much Warhol self-reflexive jokes, but he said, these are disco decor. So the idea that these that are called the shadows, and it's 103 paintings, 102 paintings, create a surround, and they're installed not too low, but low enough that you have a somatic relationship to them, like your body is close to them. And he was thinking about people dancing and being at a party, and they're not too low on the floor, otherwise people would kick them when they dance and so forth. But yeah, I think it's interesting because, of course, it's one of the few abstract works by Warhol, and as much as he was self-deprecating vis-a-vis the paintings, it was a very ambitious project for him.
This is also the first moment where I wanted to ask you about your own practice as a curator, because one of the things here that gets written about is that Heiner's brief to Warhol was extremely open-ended.
Yeah.
It was fill the space, but there was no stipulation beyond that. And my understanding is that that is still more or less the relationship that Dia has to commissions, which is interesting for a curator.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak to that? Like maybe your experience of Dia's commissioning practice today?
Yeah, I think that is true, that definitely the conversation with the artist is key. I think perhaps the freedom that the institution had in the 70s, and yes, there is something to be said, even here. I mean, Warhol at that point was Andy Warhol. He knew what he wanted to do, and I think it is still true. Recently, for instance, we commissioned Steve McQueen to do something, and similarly it was working with Steve McQueen through Beacon and have him choose a space, and he had a very clear idea, and he knew exactly what he wanted to do, and we worked to make it happen. But every artist is different, I think. Another example of a younger artist, actually, with whom I worked recently, who had a very clear idea of what he wanted to do and why he wanted to do with Dia, is Cameron Rowland.
Yeah.
And he knew exactly what he wanted. And
is this Depreciation?
It was a commission that was up in Beacon, but Depreciation was part of our conversation with him. But for other artists, instead, the conversation is key. And I think that is true for perhaps every institution, but depending on the temperament and the methodology of the artist, conversation can be extremely part of the practice, and other times the conversation happened before to see that there's already an idea that actually we can do something about. Yeah.
Sticking with this space, we have.
So the same space is now, very quickly after the shadows were on view, the broken kilometer was installed, which is a parallel to the vertical earth kilometer that we just saw. So it's, again, this kind of incredible work. If you've not seen it, I think this is one of my favorite works in New York City. 393 West Broadway. It's open 12 to 6 still today, and essentially it's just these brass rods that are installed as you see them here, but the effect is really to be experienced.
And it's shocking, again, you can become jaded, but to know that this is there, to know that the Earth Room is there, just sort of in the fabric of Chelsea, that you can go and see it at 12 to 6, as you said, is still, to me, mind-blowing. And this is also an example of Dia expanding its physical footprint to accommodate works. So it starts to make these inroads into Chelsea with the purpose of finding permanent sites for specific pieces. We can keep going. Another great example of Dia sort of responding to and branching out physically following prompts from artists. Another also example of Art Students League alumni with Judd is Judd's Marfa project. I think
again, it's a conversation that started like with Flavin at some point between 74 when Dia was established up to 1979. The idea was, let's do this in bits and pieces. And then at some point, there's a memo that says single artist museum. And And the idea in conversation with this group of artists is that what could be beneficial would be to talk to each individual artist and find a site that is agreeable to them to present their work. And Judd had visited Marfa and these military barracks that are out there, and eventually Dia purchased the land and the buildings for him, up to, and it's there that he installed a group of works by Chamberlain that were Dia works at the time. And then again comes 1986. A lot of this is the agreement between Dia and Judd needs to be interrupted because of financial reasons, something that Judd was very upset about. And there's a lot of subsequent stories about Judd being so upset, and John Chamberlain saying, what do you say to somebody who gave you so much money for such a long time, and now it's interrupting? And Judd said horrible things, and Chamberlain said, no, you say thank you.
Yeah, of course.
But Judd was furious because was a very ambitious, the project was very ambitious, and as we know.
Was it intended to be a permanent site?
It was always intended to be a permanent site.
So had it not been
so
for
then
the
he had
bankruptcy.
to kind of create the Chinati Foundation eventually, and figure out other forms of support. So while all this was happening, Dia kept spaces in Soho for temporary exhibitions, and the show, perhaps, that is in the next slide is also out of a conversation with Judd.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So Barnett
Did Judd
Newman.
propose Newman?
Judd was just wanted to see Barnett Newman's work, and so Dia put up a Barnett Newman.
Oh, wow.
Show. Yes.
Incredible. The Newman also a league affiliate, so it's nice to see that they're friendly or.
Yeah, and I
admiring.
wonder whether, at this point, Newman was dead. His wife was very much still around.
Right.
But.
Another example of a show that's up for more than 2 years.
Yeah.
Sort of creating this precedent for Dia, these long-term exhibitions.
Yeah.
What, as somebody who's worked on a lot of long-term exhibitions, what does that platform allow for visitors, allow for you as a curator?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in an ideal world, to have exhibitions on long-term view, again, 2 years, for example, is the typical time in Beacon. In Chelsea's 1 year, one artist, 1 year. But in an ideal world, it allows for a discursive community to be built around the show, so that at the end of the year, everybody would have seen, everybody who passed by New York would have seen the show at Dia. I think right now we are in a different economy of attention, and it's a bit difficult to sustain that. There's a lot of pressure to, I think that is true for every space. A lot of pressure is put on the opening.
Yeah.
Dia doesn't do openings.
Yeah.
So now we are actually actively considering our model in terms of
shorter shows?
Or generally speaking, like how to sustain the attention. And to me, as a curator, that is great to have a show up for a longer period of time, because it really allows me as the curator who has put up a show, especially if it is a commission, to understand what the work is, and for the artist is also important. And then the show is not dormant, it's also activated by discursive programs, as well as I would say more kind of tangential programs that might touch upon aspects of the exhibition and kind of draw the contours of a practice. And that is an example of the exhibition you mentioned earlier by Dwayne Linklater, which is currently on view. One of the artists, the work on view is sculpture, but the artist also makes film. And so there's a film program that runs concurrently to the show, and that really allows to contextualize the exhibition in a different way. So as a curator, it allows for thinking really about how to contextualize the show through other projects that can define the contours of the practice, not necessarily through explanation, which is again very much part of the art of the 60s, is kind of
Right.
like showing rather than telling.
This is we're going to get to this later also, I hope, but there's a humility to that where admitting that it might take 2 years to understand a work, that it takes that kind of investment from the viewer, and also not resisting the attempt to gloss a work or sort of interpose language between a viewer or somebody who's encountering the work and the work itself.
Yeah.
I've always found that to be a kind of there's a powerful humility in sort of Dia's DNA, avoiding those kinds of things.
Yeah, and I want to be honest, like some colleagues, and we talk about this all the time, especially coming from other departments, feel that we should be more, I want to say, explicit about the projects, and therefore we are actively working in conversation with them around remaining true to an ethos of kind of unmediated experience, so where you don't have too much between you and the work. Like if you think about, and I love that experience too, but if you think about going to see a Barnett Newman room at MoMA, you would go through, ticketing, metal detector.
Sure.
But
Code check.
And then getting to finding the gallery where the Barnett Newman show is, stanchions, spotlights, and finally the work, and wall text and labels. When you get a Dia, you step into the space, and here's the work. So there's something about and typically in natural light, Dia Beacon closes at 4 p.m. in the winter for that reason, because there's no artificial light. But, so that level of hardcore, unmediated experience is put to pressure, I think, today, or is put to test. And we have this conversation constantly, and we try to mediate a little more, also in terms of publicity, like how you make sure that people know that there's a show. So now we have an Instagram account, but it's kind of like interesting to see the evolution of a model, and how my job as a curator is also to kind of think through how to express that this is accessible, and it presents a different mode of accessibility. But the word accessibility is a complaint that is often voiced, and that opens up interesting questions vis-a-vis the modality of presentation.
Right. We're going to pick up the pace a little bit so we can get to some of those shows that you've been working on recently. One thing I just wanted to mention, we sort of talked a little bit about Bridgehampton. This is also a moment where Dia is renovating, or it's an instance of Dia's preference for renovating an existing building, not building a new site. And I understand that there's layers of history to the Bridgehampton building that are still alluded to. Yeah,
that is just to move ahead, perhaps quickly, but we should say, these are Flavin and Judd standing in front of the building. But the idea that Flavin had, which is quite surprising compared to the way we experience Flavin today, in a white cube space and galleries, is that Flavin has this deep interest in architecture and infrastructure, and a very specific interest in architectural preservation, actually. And he moved from upstate New York, he was living in Cold Spring, to Wainscott, Long Island, so very close to Bridgehampton. And he was super interested in New England vernacular architecture. And so this building, which was a former turn-of-the-century firehouse, and then Baptist church, the congregation outgrew the premises, and Flavin asked that Dia purchase the building. This was 1979 when the building was purchased, so it was a moment in which property in the Hamptons was not as desirable as it is now. The following year, anyway, this is kind of too much information, but the following year, like, the land use changed from agricultural to resort, and so that's why property cost went up. But this was still a moment when the building was purchased for very little, and Flavin cherished this building and lived next door and organized exhibitions there.
And those histories, the firehouse and the church, there's a red Newell post, and then there's a neon cross, which is incredible given.
So it was a black Baptist church.
Yeah.
The population in Bridgehampton was predominantly black at the time, and the congregation was, again, outgrew the premises, and so built another church next door. The church was established in 1923, and Flavin, who received, he almost went to seminary in terms of his education, and that's why the icons, the light.
Right, of course.
But he was incredibly touched, and of course, we're talking about minimalism and civil rights share a decade, and it's very present in Flavin. In all of his public statements addressed that. He was more politically committed than it seems because of the ineffable presence of his lights. But he really built a relationship with the congregation, and who left memorabilia to him, and he purchased a Bible, a pulpit, the cross that was a neon cross in front of the facade of the building.
And it's all still there?
It's all still there, yeah. He installed on the top floor where the congregation would meet, he installed a permanent installation of his fluorescent lights, and we see a sliver of it on the slide on the left, and past in kind of the altar area of the top floor of the church, so after where the congregation would sit, where the pastor would preach, that area is now containing these objects and from the material culture from the church.
Here we have Dia Center for the Arts.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention this kind of in the context, you see the great Flavin detail there, in the context of Dia's branching out with its programming to really re-engage both here and at the Mercer Street location, re-engage not only dance, which has been there from the start, but also poetry readings and sort of critical discourse in general.
I think post-bankruptcy, so the Dia was reincorporated, and I shouldn't say bankruptcy, that's not the right word, like
restructuring.
Post-restructuring, and it was never like a legal filing bankruptcy. But Dia was restructured in a way that is quite interesting. So still kind of keeping some of the ethos of the first decade, but purchasing one single building in Chelsea. Again, 1987, Chelsea was a no man's land. And now, of course, it's kind of, there's so many galleries and everything, but
that emerged in response to Dia.
I don't know, but the idea was this was a 4-story building, and at that point Dia had amassed a significant collection of the 11 artists I mentioned earlier, with about 100 Fred Sandbeck, 96 Chamberlain, 65 Flavin, but all with this kind of environmental scale. So the model was one artist, one floor, 1 year. And Dia started to work, no more purchasing, but to start to work more as a Kunsthalle, so meaning commissioning institution. And on one floor there would be collection, on the other 3 floors there would be presentations of artists who had not had a solo show in New York. So the artists in questions are Robert Gober, Maria Nordman, you name it, like a decade of 2 decades of programming of artists who were showing for the first time there. Jenny Holzer was the second show there. So artists who are now, very established, but that they were having their first show there, presented for a year. And the mandate was still to support artists without the vision, and to expand to contemporary culture at large. So There was no curator, but a curatorial committee led by Yvonne Rayner, the dancer, and certain series that we still continue today were started there. The readings in contemporary poetry, and we see James Kyler on the left in a memorable reading at Dia. And
one of the very few he ever gave.
One of the very few ever gave. So, and then on the right is the flyer for Black popular culture, which was part of these discussions in contemporary culture, which were started also around 1990, actually 1988, I think. And then in the following slide, I think we have the dance. So Dia was still maintaining a few of its Soho buildings, and so this building, who then became the Joyce Theatre, and then the Joyce moved out and is now in Chelsea, but had a very specific designation that it could only be used for dance.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Huh.
And so Dia did, and so there was this.
Oh, this was a stipulation from the city.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the lease was quite cheap, but the destination needed to be for dance, and so.
And then something like 100 new choreographed works are produced.
And it was used a lot for rehearsal, so keeping the ethos of the first decade in terms of like offering artists not only space for presentation but space for practice. So and then from now and then there would be a season of presentation after a year of closed doors rehearsal. And this is part of kind of the opening of Dia Chelsea is the planting of 7,000 oaks, which is a work by Joseph Beuys that Dia had originally supported in Kassel in 1982. And when the ambition of Beuys was of Joseph Beuys, the German artist, was to very ecologically driven and to pair a tree with a basalt stone and to create this diptych that in a way could be hopefully planted internationally, globally, to respond to the climate crisis. And Beuys at this point in the 80s, Beuys dies in 87, just as Warhol, maybe 88, Beuys dies 86. But yeah, when Dia moves to Chelsea, one of the first gestures is to plant trees, and this is a second planting in the 90s. And we just planted, with the renovation of Chelsea, 3 more trees.
Oh, fantastic. One of the great things about this piece, I mean, among many things, is how many people engage with it, encounter it, that have no idea that it's there, because it runs all the way up to 10th Avenue.
Yeah.
So
it runs. It turns the corner into 11th. So it's kind of like 22nd Street between 10 and 11. Yeah, during the pandemic, kind of restaurant sheds were built around the stones.
Yeah.
On Christmas, one restaurant still puts lights on the basalt stone.
Which is fantastic.
Trees come and go.
Yeah.
And but again, I don't want to belabor this, but in terms of stewardship of sites, as you were saying, we consider this a site. Something that is quite interesting about this one is that it cannot be owned. So Dia does not own 7,000 oaks. It is a score. Beuys was kind of come from Fluxus and the idea that the artwork is a score, and so the work is a score, and Dia partners with the department, the DOT and the parks and the municipal entities for this work. So parks oversee the trees, DOT oversees the sidewalk.
But this is an example of stewardship as a technical
stewardship without
term.
ownership.
Right.
Yeah.
This is another great example. This is moving the concept of site from physical to digital space. You've spoken to Glenn a few times. Have you ever talked about this work in particular?
Yeah, and interesting enough, in the early 90s, Dia started this program called Artist Web Projects. And again, it came very much from internal conversations. The assistant to Lynn Cook, who was the curator at the time, was really an expert and had an interest in the web. And Dia started commissioning web projects, which
Right.
was obviously a new avenue for artists. And this is kind of one of the mid of this kind of 25 years of commissioning. And yeah, very much thinking about his writing as well.
And the site is still live. You can see I visited on Friday.
Yeah.
Which,
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a big, because of course, Dia has this kind of long-term engagement, not only with artists, but also with its team. The kind of the producer of these artist web project, who was an assistant at the time, is now the head of IT at Dia. So
great.
Sarah Tucker, she's still, again, she was the producer, meaning that the curator would invite the artist and she would produce the program with them. And Sarah has done recently a huge campaign of restoration of these sites because they were all, as we know, technology evolves, and so they were all on Flash,
right.
and Flash is no longer, anyway, that's kind of technical, but
it speaks to the care and stewardship question.
It speaks to the care, that's why I bring it up, because it's kind of like, we consider all this, and again, these are not artworks that Dia owns, but there's kind of a stewardship embedded in it, and so there's a conservation for the artist web projects as well, even if Dia functions as a lending library for them. Some are more in demand than others. We receive loan requests for them. Yeah.
That question of care, I think, has different resonance with something like Spiral Jetty, which, as some of you will know, Smithson, who is also sort of responsible for introducing the term site into the lexicon, so he's of kind of unique significance, was interested in entropy and the sort of inevitable breakdown and disintegration of material, which raises a host of questions around stewardship and care. What does it mean to care for a work that admits its own disintegration?
Yeah. In the case of Smithson, it's required for Dia, and I should say this is at this stage in the presentation also chronologically. When Smithson died young, as we know, and at some point Nancy Holt, his widow and the amazing artist, contacted Dia asking whether Dia would want to take on the Spiral Jetty, which at the time was a leap of faith because the jetty was underwater.
Right.
So literally...
For decades.
The jetty was underwater. So Dia said yes without really knowing exactly whether the work would re-emerge. The thing that is interesting about the jetty, the Spiral Jetty, is that compared to the lightning field, for instance, or the works in the urban landscape that we just saw, is that it is in a remote location and that therefore it has no Dia staff on site. And so for this specific work, Dia partners with local institutions to steward it. So the Great Salt Lake Institute, which is a biologist, essentially, biology research for the ecosystem of the lake, as well as the Utah Museum of Fine Arts for educational purpose. They have a program around the Spiral Jetty, and Salt Lake City is it's not next door. It's like 4 hours from the jetty, but there's a regular engagement with students, as well as the Center for Land Use and Interpretation, which is in Andover, which is at the border with Nevada. So in that sense, we do still monitor quite closely the jetty and the lake, and the stewardship of this work is very much embedded with at this moment with the ecology of the lake. And there's a great desire to mine for lithium, as well as earlier on there was a great desire to build an oil jetty next to it. So the oil jetty actually was stopped because of the artwork, incredibly, but the mining for lithium is actually occurring. As you probably have heard, the Great Salt Lake is now at all-time low in terms of water. So
which has changed also the sort of profile of the jetty. It now becomes a kind of barometer.
But
for
we do
climate
look
change.
at, and we talk about, it has become, people go camping there and visit and walk on the jetty, and sometimes what you want is a souvenir. That's kind of a human impetus, and
people
so
take pieces.
People take pieces. So it's the basalt stones that are there. The boulders are of course there, but it's becoming a little naked, so to speak. So it's a question whether, and we are in conversation, of course, with the Holt-Smithson Foundation, whether to replenish it or let it go, which is,
So this is 99. In 2001, just to keep people sort of on track of how this is progressing, the Artist on Artist series begins, and then you're responsible for relaunching it after COVID. Can you just say a little bit about why that's so important and what it contributes to Dia now?
Yeah, I think it continues to be an opportunity to, again, build discourse, not necessarily speaking for the artist, but rather build a dialogue across generations. And this is kind of, the institution is quite self-reflexive. As we have seen, it kind of remains with this kind of very idiosyncratic ethos. And it is quite wonderful to see generation after generation how, which artists become of interest.
I'm sure.
So, it remains a quite important part of our program.
We're going to jump through a couple of the remaining sites and then talk a little bit about Beacon, Chelsea, and then your shows. This is a work that probably more people that has been interacted with by more people than any other site, Max Neuhaus's Times Square.
Yeah.
As some of you might know, it involves a sort of sound array that Neuhaus installed under the ventilation grates of a pedestrian triangle on Broadway and I think 45th, 46th.
Yeah, between 47 and
6th and 7th maybe.
Yeah.
So Dia, just to summarize, Dia gains again stewardship over it and ensures that it's running 24/7 after it goes defunct in 92. You mentioned Nancy Holt. In addition to being Smithson's widow, incredible artist in her own right.
Yeah.
Another site that Dia has stewardship over, the Sun Tunnels.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to say about this before we jump?
This was an intentional, over the past decade, the thinking has been, okay, how do we expand this collection? And so the Sun Tunnels come from those conversations and the relationship already established with Holt-Smithson Foundation.
And then I think, in my view, sort of a work that in some ways breaks the mold, or it continues Dia's history, but also starts to be, as you said, self-reflexive about that history, is Cameron Rowland's Depreciation. I didn't realize that you had worked with Cameron. Do you want to say a little bit about what makes this so unique?
Yes, so this is a work to be noted that the artist Cameron Rowland had realized in 2018 for an exhibition at Los Angeles MoCA, and it's quite interesting in that the intervention here is to acquire an acre of land on Edisto Island in South Carolina, which was specifically an area of the United States that was promised after emancipation to freed former slaves in reparation for slavery. So the idea of 40 acres and a mule, the 40 acres would have been cut off through Edisto Island and neighboring areas in South Carolina, former plantations. And Cameron's Rowland intervention was to purchase 1 acre of land. Cameron's intervention comes from thinking about reparations as kind of an historical, unfulfilled gesture, and what would reparations be if we think outside of a regime of property. And so he purchased an acre of land and applied a restricting covenant, meaning like a legal instrument to restrict and define the use of this plot of land in perpetuity, and by restricting the use to no commercial use, no leisure, no tourism, no nothing.
And an appraisal value of 0.
The appraisal value is 0, which is why depreciation in the title. So the legal status of the land is the artwork. The land is not meant for visitation, and the artwork is experienced through the legal documents that define the status of the land. And this work comes from Cameron's intersectional interest in both the Black radical tradition, but also a history of institutional critique and site specificity. And so artists such as Walter de Maria, whose Lightning Field he visited as a young person, and thinking about what was interesting to me in this work and learning that Cameron was looking to partner with an institution to maintain this work in perpetuity in terms of like the legal fees that go into paying a lawyer every year to assess the value of the property still zero, and other kind of legal administrative actions that as an artist he cannot spend too much time worrying about, and especially if wanting to ensure the perpetuity of this piece after he's no longer with us, even if he's very young. But nevertheless, the idea to me was interesting because depreciation in many ways exposes the infrastructure of land art. So all this infrastructure that we've seen until now, and the idea of purchasing so much real estate, or taking so much land off the market in order to not so much speculate on it, but to present artworks in perpetuity. So all that is kind of exposed here, and as well as intersecting with a tradition of not only land art but also conceptual art that Dia had stewarded across.
Another question is, am I right in thinking that this never appears with any kind of curatorial gloss, that it's just the covenant?
Yeah, so, and that there is an extended caption, which is a way in which Cameron controls the discourse around the work. And they're typically essays that contextualize the work in a historical framework. So in the case of depreciation, to me it was important that this is added as a Dia site in order to understand this work in the context of the other sites. This was not always part of the conversation. The conversation started with, can it be part of the collection? But to me it was important it would be a site and it would be signaled as a site, and so that it could enter in dialogue with the others, as well as have a dedicated brochure, which is a handout in which we articulate information about the cited artworks. And in the case of Cameron, there is specifically a sentence was added stating that the artwork is not meant for visitation, so it doesn't want to participate in an economy of tourism to travel to the site. And the address is there if one wants to go, is 8060 Maxi Road, Edisto Island, but there's a specification that the artwork is not meant for that kind of experience, but rather intellectual understanding of, and also I want to say this kind of imaginative leap, what if real reparations were to abolish property, which is what started slavery in the first place.
We're going to jump to Dia Beacon, which of course sort of opens to the public in 2003. The building, the point I was just hoping you could speak to here is, again, Dia's interest in repurposing, renovating an existing site. And maybe if you could speak to Erwin's interventions.
Yeah. So this was, again, continuing. At this point, Dia had the site in Chelsea that we just saw and continued to maintain all these other cited land artworks. And this building was purchased because, in spite of the fact that Dia had stopped collecting in 1986, Dia had a very, very vast collection. And so this was a former Nabisco factory, factory for boxes for Nabisco products. So very vast. And Robert Irwin, the Light and Space California artist, was invited to collaborate with Dia to renovate the building for the purpose of installing art. And the intervention is very Irwin, which is, this is a modular building over 2 floors, underground level and street level. And Irwin really worked on, and because it was a factory, it has sawtooth skylights across, as well as vast windows on either side. And Irwin really worked on the light. So the building is, in a way, a Robert Irwin artwork today in terms of the experience of light as you walk through the building. During the hours of the day, you see light changing, and with a modulation of frosted and transparent glass.
The other thing that Irwin is famous for saying is that the sort of experience of Beacon starts at Grand Central when you board the Metro North.
Yeah.
Do you experience it that way when you go from the city? Because it's, I mean, in some ways that makes Dia Beacon a kind of thesis statement for Dia in general.
Yeah.
So much of the sort of themes and concepts that we've been talking about are instantiated in this site. Do you see it?
Yeah.
It's sort of as a jaded, sophisticated curator.
No, I think it's still
it works on you.
Quite phenomenal.
Yeah.
I mean, especially, you see the season changing, and it does, connect with certain ideas that Walter de Maria also had around. You need some sort of isolation in order to experience art. Mm-hmm. So these are very much part of the Dia ethos still. And that kind of isolation is also connected to that kind of unmediated experience that we discussed earlier. So this idea that you need to be to be in a kind of art mood, you to be put in a certain kind of sense of context, experience, where you could leave for a second all that goes on in your day-to-day and have a dedicated experience, which again, if you think about what I said earlier, was connected to Heiner Friedrich's idea of the Rothko Chapel. And so it has many undertones that are a bit, pilgrimage, mm-hmm. But it remains quite extraordinary at the literally kind of experiential level. When I go up once a week to work, every time I'm up there, I'm like, wow, time moves differently up here. Mm-hmm.
Gorgeous.
The level of focus is very different, mm-hmm. and so forth and so on. So yeah.
I'm going to zip through some of these other slides to get to. I was hoping we could talk a little bit about Dwayne's show in particular.
Yeah, I think we can move forward. The idea is that as Beacon Open, very much staying close to the same ethos, and we can go through the slides, but to have monographic presentations across the various rooms and shows that would unfold over several years, so commissions of time-based art that either return over several moments, over several seasons, or remain on view for extended period of time.
I'll just mention again a couple of long-term installations.
Yeah, this has been on view since 2003, so that's quite key.
Bourgeois space, and again, this is sort of pointing back to Dia's conviction that that the typical 3 or 4 month exhibition cycle is maybe not what is most appropriate. So these long multi-year installations. It also gives you a chance to program around those works.
And this is just a recent program that was in November, and an upcoming one that is at Dia Chelsea. We restart the semester of Artist on Artist lectures, and Kathy Burkhardt chose to speak about Louise Bourgeois.
Fantastic.
So it's going to be
a couple days.
Very soon.
There's a Judd long-term installation on view. There's also a Smithson long-term installation on view. We also have something, this is now really your history. Dia Chelsea reopens in 21, merging those, I think, 3 buildings on 22nd Street. Opens with this incredible Lucy Raven exhibition. Multiple works, I think. Are these shows that you also worked on? Did you work on
All of these, yeah.
Stop me if you want to say anything in particular.
Yeah, just again, continuing the idea of a single artist per gallery and exhibitions that stay on view up to 3 years, such as the Guidelli-Guidi show on the left, and Kishio Suga just opened this summer, will be on view for 2 years. And to note, alongside Jack Whitten, for instance, this is a bit different because it was a 100% alone exhibition, so Dia doesn't own any of these works. It was really a focused presentation. And that is, just to hint at what the curatorial thinking is these days, is to continue to think about the legacy of the art of the 60s and 70s, specifically minimalism and conceptual and process art from these decades, and both work across, let's say, different avenues. One is to think about which artists Dia had not collaborated with and who would be really interesting in conversation with the collection. And so the presentation of Guidelli-Guidi and Kishio Suga are two examples. Jack Whitten is another great example of thinking about an artist in this case was not still alive, and differently from Suga and Senga, but with who produced a very specific body of work that enters in great conversation with conceptual painting at Dia, from Warhol to Ryman, and then along another axis, which is continuing into the legacy of that vocabulary and language today, and this is why Lucy Raven and...
Yeah. I also just want to applaud you for doing the work with Jack Whitten. We're all, I think, in your experience, this sort of resurgence of his
incredible
recently,
artist.
but you were there earlier. Your incredible publication also everyone should get. Your Guidelli-Guidi show, also fantastic. The publication, actually this is a moment to sort of mention how this publication differs from a standard catalog.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because of the site conditions in Beacon, which is natural light and works being on view for such a long time, a whole part of Senga's practice was impossible to present in Beacon, and that is all of her writings, drawings, performances for the camera, such as the one on the cover, where she would not necessarily open up to a public, but work in the studio with her sculptures and hire a photographer to take pictures of her staging herself with the objects and thinking about what happens when you put an object on you, and thinking about a sort of object theater and still performance in a way. So all that material, most of which was never seen before, and that came through conversation. Again, the exhibition of Guidelli-Guidi happened over 5 years of conversation with the artist, thinking about which body of work we would want to recreate together, and over those conversations and long sessions with the artist, a lot of this material resurfaced, and so the decision was to make a primary source book that would be a companion to the exhibition of sculpture and installations.
And then the last project that I wanted to touch on, which is again on view now, you have a couple days to go see it, is the project you did with Dwayne Linkletter.
Also a long conversation, and
5 years too, I think.
Yeah, I also started with an artist lecture, and
who was he speaking about?
He spoke about Nancy Holt.
Okay.
He actually didn't speak. He decided not.
Okay.
He said he would love to do it, but he would not want to lecture. And I was like, okay, we're going to find another way. And so what he did was actually to start a band with his son, and the band is called Eagles with Eyes Closed, and actually performed during the show back in October. And what they did is that Nancy Holt, when she realized the sun tunnels, made a film for the making of the tunnels. So it's a lot of kind of walking through the land and assessing the site and excavating the aggregate, pouring the concrete, cutting the wood for the mold and so forth. So it's kind of a lot of labor and environmental sound and noise, no dialogue. And it's about a 30-minute film. And so what Duane did was to rescore that film or to respond to the soundtrack with a bass and drum improvisation. So they are not musicians. They're not professional musicians. They obviously know music, but so it was an endurance performance in a way. And then we screened and staged the two as a duet, so in the space. So that kind of, the dialogue was so, fruitful that we decided to commission him a larger project for Chelsea, and he went in a different direction. He makes films and paintings, and for this show he made instead a group of sculptures that are abstract representations of buffaloes, and we can see caught in their typical behavior. So it's over 2 rooms. This is one of them, and together the 2 rooms, the buffaloes kind of create a circle. So 3 on this room and 4 in the other room, 7 in total. And the circle kind of is also marked on the floor and signifies, literally engraved on the floor, and signifies a teepee circle. So thinking about entering a different space where under a different rule. The teepee is, of course, both a stereotype of indigeneity, but also, and Duane is an artist of indigenous descent, and is both a symbol of indigeneity, but also a stereotype of it, and as well as still an active technology in Duane's culture, and a symbol of a different kind of rule and law. And so the idea of marking the teepee circle for the buffalo to roam free was very much part of the concept.
The last question I have, and then hopefully you'll have a few more minutes. Thank you everybody for being such a great audience. We can open up to a couple of
that
questions.
would be great.
The last question I had was this. We've had now the benefit of sort of a sprint through Dia's history. When the couple of occasions that I've gone to experience the work, it does very much feel like both a work on its own, and certainly has its own merits, needless to say, but also something that feels to me very, very in dialogue with Dia's history. And I'm just wondering if that was part of your conversation with Duane as you worked on the show. Is that something that was on his mind or on your mind?
100%. And I think many commissions inevitably reflect on Dia's history. So was Lucy Raven that we saw earlier. It was a film about extraction. So in a way, her response to land art. And so is Duane's work. And he was very much thinking about the space that Dia has occupied and the artists that Dia has supported, and the American West as a space that artists who have benefited of a land that was empty canvas because of a genocide. So somehow thinking about the much longer trajectory and the history of the United States and of North America in general, that was once buffalo territory. So returning the buffalo to Dia was quite meaningful to him, and actually probably why he went into sculpture, thinking about these kind of monumental works. That's why our conversations led. And I must say, this is an example in which this is an artist for whom conversation is key, and dialogue is very much part of everything. So we would have monthly meetings for years, both leading to the artist-on-artist lecture, so to speak, and to this commission. And he would ask me questions, he would tell me what he was thinking, and then eventually quite last minute, actually, we finally got to this project. But the idea of the structure, the idea of the 12+2, which is 12 poles in a circle to build a teepee plus 2 off-centered to hold the smoke flaps, that came very, very early. So, and this kind of almost invisible gesture to mark the circle and the 12, imaginary poles, that came quite early. But then as a structure, so again, thinking about Lawrence Weiner, who was an artist that Dia supported, and this idea of kind of displacement, the structure is marked specifically with stone that comes from the land where he lives. So there's very subtle, I knew already was an artist who was working within a tradition of conceptual art of that kind, with a very specific cultural identity that he brought about in this show. But again, through very much thinking about this question of the buffalo, the protagonist.
Yeah, incredible. Please join me in thanking Matilde Guidelli-Guidi. Thank you so much.
That was fun.